Hello, this is a very quick rundown on what I was thinking of for the evidence-based medicine for lung this week, or for the week after, I should say. I was thinking of focusing on, when we have a look at the 6 components of looking at a paper or praising it, really these first 2, question type and study design. And I was going to give a particular focus on cohorts and cross-sectional studies and case control, since that's what in the mapping we were trying to cover for this SGL. There were 2 key references that I thought could be part of the pre-activity for people to look at beforehand. Essentially, what I want to get people to get in the way of doing is work out what's the question type of the study. So, is it treatment, diagnosis, prognosis, etiology, or something else? And then what's the study design? Because the idea is if you know your study design and you know what type of question you have, you can work out what level of evidence you're aiming for. So, in this case, if I had a question on whether asbestosis causes mesothelioma, and I had a prospective cohort study going across, that's a level 2 evidence. So that's what I want people to get in the way of doing. And along the way, it's also just going to highlight some of the disadvantages and advantages of each study. For actually working out what the study design is, I thought we'd just use this other slide. And essentially, what you can see you do here is you look at a paper and you go, right, did the investigators assign an exposure? Is it an experiment? And if it is, was it a random allocation or not? And that's how you work out randomized controlled trials and the ones that weren't. If there wasn't any assigned exposure, is there a comparison group? Because if there's no comparison group, for example, if I just want to know what's the age-adjusted incidence of mesothelioma in the population of Western Australia, all you're going to have is a P and an O of your P code. So the P will be your population in Western Australia, and your outcome will be the age standardized incidence. And you're not comparing something with something else, so that would be a descriptive study. And then, and where this SGL is headed is really then going to be focusing on these ones. So if there is a comparison, so, asbestos exposure versus none, well, then it's an analytical study. And then it's just a case of working out, is it a cohort study, case control, or cross-sectional? And the key thing there is to work out when the patients were selected, did you start with the exposure and then follow them for the outcome? Or when they were selected, to start with the outcome for those that were selected and go back to the exposure? Or did you just send out a survey and just ask people at one particular point in time who had mesothelioma and who had asbestos exposure at one point in time, which is the cross-sectional study. So you can see that where the exposure and the outcome lie in relationship to each other, and particularly in terms of what was selected first, these two is what really tells you between these. So if we go to the slide, here's my case. So we're going to give a plug for best available evidence, just to point out that asbestos. We discovered that asbestos exposure causes a rare cancer called mesothelioma. I point out it's very rare, and this is one area where the best available evidence has saved many lives. And I pointed out the incidence of mesothelioma to show it's really rare. And what we're going to do is, and I've just made up a few study designs, and I'm getting people to work out what's the question type, the study design, the level of evidence, and then the main, and if they got time, the main advantages and disadvantages of the study design just from observing it. So here's case number 1. You have a look at it, people think about it. You can pause the video if you want. So this is a study done in 2016. So what is it? Did they assign any intervention? No. Is there a comparison group? Yes, there's those who were exposed, asbestos, those that weren't, so it's analytical. And then it's a case of the direction. Well, they selected patients on the basis of their exposure, and then they follow them for an outcome, so therefore it's a cohort study. And then you go here and go, right, okay, it's an etiology question. what was the, it's a cohort study. Now there's prospective cohort and retrospective cohort. With this one, they retrospectively collected the information. They did the study in 2016, went back, so it's a retrospective cohort study, so it's level 3 evidence. And people can talk about the advantages and disadvantages. Being retrospective, there's going to be a bit of recall bias often with these things, but the key thing I'd remember is it's a really rare tumour, so you've got to collect a lot of patients' exposure to find a significant difference in what's a rare tumour. So there's sort of the two probably issues with it. So we go to the next. And this is the case. You can pause the video, read it. And what you might notice here is that it's similar thing, except they started the study in 1950 and collected the information prospectively. So you go through here and you work out it's a cohort study by that same graph, and you realise it's prospective, and this time they're aiming for level 2 evidence. Just as if you reflect on that sort of study, so it's a great study to aim for, high level evidence. But gee, imagine trying to do that study, something that's that rare, prospectively. And then we just go to the next case where we've got this, so you can have a read of that. And hopefully you'll realise here that yes, there's no investigator signing exposures, it's observational, therefore there is a comparison group. You are comparing two things, asbestos and non-asbestos. You're comparing cancer and non-cancer group for an exposure, so there's a comparison of two things here, asbestos and non-asbestos. And in this case, you're actually selecting patients based on the outcome and going back in time for an exposure. So it's a case control study, and that's, you can see here, that's level 3 evidence. And I guess the main point I'd make here is that it's going to be these studies are cheaper to do because if you're starting with a rare outcome, you don't have to enroll you don't have to find as many patients and trawl through as many notes. And but a disadvantage is that they are it's sometimes tricky to work out who that control group is that you select. Are they truly similar enough, or are they confounders? And the other thing is that there's going to be some recall bias when people who have mesothelioma are more likely to remember their asbestos exposure. And then we go to the last case, and hopefully when you look at that one, you realise that's a cross-sectional survey, exposure and outcome at the same time, and that's a really level 4 evidence, and that's because you don't know which followed which. I mean, you need the exposure to precede the outcome. So I think with the Bradford Hill criteria that says that's a bit of an essential, a key feature to show causation, and sectional studies can't do that. So that's all. End of the story. It's just the last one, a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but here we got a randomised control trial, and so you can run down the thing there and work out it's that. And interestingly, we often don't talk about it in terms of etiology, and I think the main things is it's probably usually highly unethical to do harm studies with randomised control trials. Even though otherwise the design would probably be right, and you'd have to enroll a lot of people for such a rare outcome. So anyway, that's there just for completeness.